I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Miri Rodriguez.
Storytelling itself, it is a strategy. It's a content strategy that drives a narrative through the touch points of an experience. And then when you add brand to that, it's actually the brand experience. So when you're thinking through brand storytelling and how you're building that loyalty, the brand can also be a very broad word. How are we weaving the brand mission? How are we're building all of these things, our identity as a whole, through the stories that we tell?
Miri Rodriguez, based in Pompano Beach, Florida, is an award-winning, globally recognized storyteller and senior storyteller for future of work at Microsoft. She is a creative journalist, content strategist, renowned keynote speaker, and international thought leader in brand storytelling, personal branding, and youth entrepreneurship. She has earned several awards in digital marketing and customer experience and is ranked as a top in-demand speaker at leading industry conferences globally. Her previous clients include Adobe, Discover, Microsoft, and McKesson. My interview with Miri Rodriguez is coming right up. But first,
as a person with a very deep voice, I'm hired all the time for advertising campaigns. But a deep voice doesn't sell B2B, and advertising on the wrong platform doesn't sell B2B either. That's why if you're a B2B marketer, you should use LinkedIn ads. LinkedIn has the targeting capabilities to help you reach the world's largest professional audience. That's right, over 70 million decision makers all in one place. All the big wigs, then medium wigs. Also small wigs who are on the path to becoming big wigs. Okay, that's enough about wigs. LinkedIn ads allows you to focus on getting your B2B message to the right people. So, does that mean you should use ads on LinkedIn instead of hiring me, the man with the deepest voice in the world? Yes. Yes, it does. Get started today and see why LinkedIn is the place to be to be. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
Miri Rodriguez, welcome to On Brand.
It's a pleasure to be here, Nick. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have a conversation with you around branding and storytelling and all the good things.
Yeah, well, you literally, I can make my dad joke, wrote the book on brand storytelling because it is called Brand Storytelling, out in paperback in its second edition here, which is certainly something that shows that both branding and storytelling aren't going anywhere anytime soon. But I have to tease because it's something that we talk about here, a lot of the times separately, branding and storytelling. Boy,
Yeah.
you picked two really hard topics to get your arms around. So where do you start with brand and story?
Oh gosh, it's a great question. I don't know where I started because when I was I like everyone else, I was dealing with both separately at some point in my life, and then at one point, I'm like, wait a minute, the story builds the brand and the brand builds the story, and they're intertwined. And actually, when the book came out, we were not using brand storytelling together. Like you could, before this, so a lot of people kind of understood, which I'm so glad that they are one and the same. At some point they converge, and the story builds the brand and the brand builds the story of the brand. And so the brand storytelling is a strategy for both, and they can be standalones, but it'd be really good if they're not.
So you obviously, a lot of when we first come into contact with story, we hear that it is a powerful tool, that it goes back to our earliest development as a species, that there's science to it.
Yeah.
But connecting that to this kind of classic, hey, story good,
Yeah.
to something as complex as branding.
Yeah.
How do we connect those dots?
Yeah. So, we look at story in itself, and the broadness of that word and storytelling in general. I've seen anything from people saying, hey, we just got to go tell stories, and that's storytelling. And I'm like, no, please don't do that. I mean, yes, it is part of that, and that is a channel, but storytelling. And then when you add brand storytelling, I'll break it down. Storytelling itself, it is a strategy. It's a content strategy that drives a narrative through the touch points of an experience. And then when you add brand to that, it's actually the brand experience. So when you're thinking through brand storytelling and how you're building that loyalty, the brand can also be a very broad word. Some people will say it's like, it's the representation of, it's the emotion that it leads, to customers. Like there's so many things we could say around branding, just that storytelling. So when you bring them together, what you're doing is you're looking at the strategy from a brand loyalty, a customer loyalty perspective of how are we weaving the brand mission, what we started with, what we are about, what we represent, what we sell, what we connect with, how are we're building all of these things, our identity as a whole, through the stories that we tell, especially because today we have so many other people, so many other constituents and audiences telling the brand story for us, right? So we have people talking about our brand, hopefully, and it's not necessarily the stories we want to tell. And so today, stories enable us to create the stance that we want and really remind our customers and our potential customers who and what we're about and why we do what we do. It's really back to enabling the brand mission through the stories we tell. And so that is so important in today's world, because with content saturation, with social media, and now the advent of AI, stories are being told. And if you're not telling your story, somebody else will. And it might not be the story you want to tell, right? And so you got to kind of keep the brand identity and the brand essence intact, and driving it through the navigation of social media, AI, content, digital, all these spaces that we navigate, and current events. And where is the brand in all of this? Stories enable us to center the brand wherever we want it to position.
So how do you find the story that makes sense for your brand so you don't end up telling the wrong story or having the wrong story told by someone else out there on behalf of your brand?
Yeah, so there's two ways, right? So the first, brand storytelling, I always talk about two narratives in essence. One is the consistent evolution, the story of the brand in its evolution. So it's really what we call the origin story. Your brand was born, it grew, it has friends and foes. It's just like an entity. It navigates the world as it is, right? It grows, it expands, it has partners. It scales back whatever is happening to that brand. That in itself, you will never run out of content, right? If you're telling that story, if you're affiliating yourself with a specific, political association, if you're pivoting your brand completely, you have to tell the story, right? There's so many examples out there of brands who possibly most likely meant really well to, come into new spaces where now Gen Z and millennials are requesting the brands to take a stance against, for example, social justice. And so they meant well and they wanted to come in, but there was no story about their why. And so it doesn't sit well when it lands with audiences, when a brand makes a pivot or makes a shocking new development in the evolution of its brand. We've decided to go green. We've decided to scale back, whatever those decisions are. So that in itself is an origin story that needs to be continuously being told from the top down, inside out. It's the mission of where the brand is going. Then you have the stories that are told at different levels, functions of the brand, business functions of the brand. So you have sales, you have corporate, you have, marketing, you have finance, you have all these verticals, business functions of the brand. And those are telling stories, right? You have data storytelling. When you come out, if you're a public company and you're talking about your revenue, for example, and in your profits. And so those are the other stories that make up and really, they corroborate, if you will, the brand story itself. So there's these stories that don't look like they're part of the story, but they are. And then you have marketing telling the stories of the actual branding in itself. And so how do you do that? You go back to the mission and you evaluate your current mission. You will not believe, Nick, how many brands today that I consult with today still have an About Us page that it has like a 20-page, mission statement that nobody knows. And it doesn't even reflect the brand today. And so it is important that the mission drives the brand story, asking yourself why we exist, and also asking yourself, if I didn't tell the story, what happens? What happens if I don't talk about my brand, what we're doing and how we're doing it? What happens if I don't reiterate and remind our customers of what our core values are? That's a good question to ask, because a lot of people don't ask that, and they think, again, we're just going to go tell a story about the CEO. No, that's not brand storytelling. That's a story about the CEO. You know what I mean? So I think it's back to the basics. And in essence, it's reinventing or rediscovering or rebranding, if you have to, your brand story. I mean, we did at Microsoft, right? I represent this fabulous brand that had to do that. I mean, when the Googles and the Amazons and the Apples of the world came around, we're like, oh, wait a minute, right? And so our CEO, Satya, 7 years ago, he was like, hey, let's rewrite our story real quick because we need to enter the market differently. And so we did. And it inherently changed our culture. I mean, I remember the pre-Satya days, the post-Satya days, and anybody who's been there knows that and feels that and lives that. And so brand storytelling is a change agent. It is a change agent for the brand and for the market.
I love that point. And especially, I want to come back to everything you just said about Microsoft, but I also want to rewind quickly. I'm glad you brought up the About page, because I feel like that's we've gone through all the stages that you get with brand storytelling, because it's the general brand is good, story is good, go. And like you said, not enough. And then the follow-up is usually, so it's what's on our About page. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad, because that does seem to come up a lot. And it's like, no, it's not just the About page. And your point of the About page is a lot of times irrelevant information. I mean, not that there's not a time and a place for that, but we're often leading with the wrong thing there as well. I'm glad you brought up the different business functions and Satya Nadella at Microsoft, because I often cite him as an example of someone really leading with story. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great example organizationally from a leader that gets it, is sharing not only stories about the organization, but stories about his own life as well. Yes. And, as a means of moving, I think the example is of shifting the culture from, from know-it-alls to learn-it-alls at Microsoft.
Yes. I got to tell you, when he first came on board, he actually wrote a book called Hit Refresh. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend. It was really beautiful to me that he wrote it, it was out in the market for everyone to read, but he actually wrote a version for employees only, which has his own handwriting in it, of course, copied, but he would take the book itself and you have his notes highlighting some important points that he wanted his people, his people under his leadership to really capture these words and these quotes. And I was like, wow. And I remember one of the stories that really changed me, and I would say changed my life, because I don't consider myself empathetic and empath. And I certainly didn't back then. He talked about his own personal story of, he was in this moment in his career. He applied for this kind of big job, and he was, he went through the loop in the interview, and then the hiring manager asked him a question, and he's like, hey, they had gone through all the technical questions, right, all the hard questions, and then the hiring manager says, okay, I have one more question for you. If you're walking down the street and you see a baby crying, what do you do, right? And so he tells the story that he just kind of said, I'll look for the mom. I'll look around to see where the mom is. And the hiring manager said, no, you pick it up. You pick up the baby. You lack empathy. And he didn't get the job, right? And so it's like, oh. And so when he tells his own personal account of somebody telling him and making it very real that he lacked empathy and he needed to build empathy, then he comes now, years later, becomes the CEO of this company. And he leads with empathy. I often talk about, for me personally, that was very touching, because I talk about storytelling being an emotional transaction. We have to empathize with ourselves and with the audience to tell stories that matter, that are relevant, especially in this content-saturated world. And so for me, I endeavored to learn about that. I was like, holy crap, am I an empath? Like, do I have that skill? I didn't even know it was a skill. I thought it was, a personality trait that I certainly did not have. My kids call me cold and ruthless. And I'm like, yes, and you know what I mean? Like, okay, I don't see that as a problem. And so for me, it was like, wait, is that a skill set? And it became like, if you look at the last, whatever number of years in the last decade, we are now have embedded empathy as a soft skill, which never before. And so I endeavored to learn more. And in that process, that's when I became, a storyteller as a function, an actual profession. And I was like, wow, how incredible it is that I sit here and I have to, I'm telling stories about devs and engineers. I'm not one, but I have to empathize with them, understand their trajectory, their journey, and how what they're doing impacts them. So it was very fascinating for me in the example that you're given about Satya and his leadership and how that all comes about in storytelling. If you are telling stories, but they don't impact at the emotional level, the stories they're not going to deliver what they're supposed to. They're not going to accomplish their mission in what they're supposed to do. People remember how they felt, and we know that, right? This is that very quote about people won't remember what you said or you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. The story has to make you feel something. Back to the About Us page. Yes, there's a space for that. But when you visit a website or when you come in contact with your brand at any point, in any way, whether it's brick and mortar, whether it's digital spaces, what are you feeling? Ask yourself that. And is it consistent, right? For us, our word, what I call the universal truth in our story, is empowerment, right? We set out to rewrite our story to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. So I wake up every day. My job is to empower someone in something. And that's my job. In essence, that's everybody else's jobs. That's what our badge says. And that's what we do. And so what about yours? Have you captured that feeling for your brand, for your personal brand? Indeed, both. Can people say, hey, I met Miri and I felt this. And if that didn't happen, then I'm failing in branding myself. I'm failing in giving you the essence of what I aim at when you connect with me as a brand.
On Brand, we'll be right back after this.
As a person with a very deep voice, I'm hired all the time for advertising campaigns. But a deep voice doesn't sell B2B, and advertising on the wrong platform doesn't sell B2B either. That's why if you're a B2B marketer, you should use LinkedIn ads. LinkedIn has the targeting capabilities to help you reach the world's largest professional audience. That's right, over 70 million decision makers all in one place. All the big wigs, then medium wigs, also small wigs who are on the path to becoming big wigs. Okay, that's enough about wigs. LinkedIn ads allows you to focus on getting your B2B message to the right people. So, does that mean you should use ads on LinkedIn instead of hiring me, the man with the deepest voice in the world? Yes, it does. Get started today and see why LinkedIn is the place to be to be. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
Now, back to the show. I love all of these examples from your work at Microsoft, and the one with Satya and the hiring story, and what's really ultimately a teaching story. And gosh, you take something like you were talking about earlier, like empathy,
Yeah.
and it's another one of those things that most of us would nod along and say, "Yep, empathy, good." But teaching empathy is a heavy lift. But through story, and that story, I mean, that was a great reminder for even me sitting here of, oh yeah, that's what empathy is. That difference between finding the parent and picking the kid up. So I think that really showcases what you're talking about. So you talk in the book about kind of reimagining IMC, integrated marketing communications. So in looking at that, a lot of and I think that's such an important, speaking of heavy lifts, an important thing, because I think a lot of times, sometimes we isolate the work of the brand storyteller, and it's this kind of fun, laid back, hippy dippy thing, and it's separate from like the real linear work of the marketer. And you go to great lengths to really connect this to measuring success, to goals, to benchmarking. How does story fit in with some of those things that maybe folks with a traditional marketing background might not think is going to be there for them with a brand storytelling approach?
Great question. And I will add not just marketers, and I will also
Yeah.
add communicators, right? Because we have internal communicators, executive communicators who are working hopefully in tandem with marketing. And at times I see a lot that they're not, that's a problem in itself. I'm like, how are you not communicating? It's so siloed. And so when you look at, again, let's take the brand narrative, the brand origin story, the reimagining of the IMC, of the integrated communications plan, are when you think about the program itself and how we embed this through the business functions, you have many ways that brands in general attack or think about messaging, how to deliver it, what channels to deliver, internal and external. And a lot of times they don't talk to each other. And so they are sending out disparate or dissonant messaging that does not tie back to the actual mission or to the actual brand story. And so that creates confusion inside. It will inevitably create confusion outside. Perfect examples of this will be a brand that will go out with a marketing campaign, and they'll do a summer campaign. It's like, oh, summer, and this is our summer product. Yet they're a global company, and it's not summer in Argentina. So and that happens a lot more than we think. It's that whoever created the campaign and signed off and paid for it, everybody was like, yay, this is amazing. And somebody was not there to represent. And so the reimagined IMC proposes that when you think about your brand story, everyone first understands the story. Everybody has been briefed on the storytelling. Everybody has assets and common assets that we can all derive from. I propose something like a brand central station, where there's like all the assets of this is our brand story, this is our brand assets, this is how we tell the story, this is the messaging, the general messaging, and everything comes back to this. Your campaign has to ask itself the question, does it go back to the brand story and the brand mission? Does it align to the brand story and the brand mission? So as you begin to navigate your communications plan through the different channels, through the sales pitch, and through the marketing campaigns, and through the finance, evolution of how the profiting of the company, how does all that tie back? And so there is an approach to training specifically in having this, what I call a storytelling machine, where people are represented from the different functions, a V team of some sort, where there's a task force designed and aligned to ensure to close those gaps between the cross-functional teams, to make sure that everybody's speaking the language of the brand and everybody's telling the story of the brand within its capacity, right? We're not all going to sound the same. There's sub-organizations, but we are all aligning in essence to that main message. What do we want to say and how do we say it? And a lot of times we miss out. So many times we miss out on the messaging because everybody's off in their own tunnel vision. So the proposal is build, your first storytellers are your employees and your vendors and your partners. It's an internal machine that then goes outside and, cohesively tells the story.
If folks listening out there are excited about the idea of a brand central station and are thinking, God, I got to go get started on that right now.
Yes.
What are some of the most important things to include? Because I love the outcomes that you talked about of we're not all going to, because a lot of times we hear stuff like that, or not we, but the folks that we're talking to hear things like that. And they're like, they want us all, like you said, to sound alike, to look alike. And we're not.
We're not.
But we need some of those kind of structural elements. So what do you think is most important to give folks to be that first storyteller for the brand?
Yeah, so I'll give you some examples we've done at Microsoft. There's a couple of them. We actually do have a landing page, an internal intranet, where it is called Brand Central, and it has everything from, it starts with a very simple reading, this is our story. And it tells a story of Microsoft in a really light, fun, engaging way. You want to read it. It's less than one page. And then it goes, and this is our story to our customers. And this is our story to, our partners. And so it's got these assets, and it tells you, and of course, then you go into deeper brand identity, how to use our logo, brand guidelines type thing. But it is an all-encompassing core values. Here are our core values. Here is our corporate social responsibility. It's all the things in one place of who we are and who you are, because you're part of this brand. So it makes you feel part of the story. You're not disassociated from, I work from this brand and I think I know their core values. It's like, no, I live these core values. I align to the core values. I wake up every morning and I know what the core values are and what I'm going to go do. So it's this real, it's bringing everyone in as an active character of the story. So have your assets, tell the story how you want it to hear, how you want your employees to hear it, and how you want your customers to hear it. We created playbooks, right? So there's a little, I think we called it the little red playbook storybook or something like that, where it was literally like how to tell the story from a one person perspective, how, like, so many different ways to iterate. And it was fun. And we went campaigning all across. And what you saw as a result of that, and it hasn't happened, doesn't happen tomorrow. It takes years. It's a long-term approach. Storytelling is a long-term strategy to culture change. But what you start seeing is every leader in their own voice with their own, specific business function, in the end will always mention our mission. There is not one Microsoft meeting that doesn't happen where the mission is not mentioned. That's fascinating to me, that we have made it part of, I've made the story mine. I am an active character in the Microsoft story, and I believe it and I live in. I'll tell you this, Nick. If I didn't believe it, I wouldn't be there. I would not work for a company where I don't know and believe their story. That's number one. Number two, we had a chief storyteller. So Satya brought in our chief marketing officer, who just recently retired, Chris Cap. Amazing man. I mean, I admire him so much. Great leader. So he brings this guy, Steve Clayton, who was blogging at the time he's from the UK, and he kept blogging on his own about tech stuff. They bring him and make him the chief storyteller at Microsoft, and he creates this the storytelling council and community, a global community. We are now, thousands of people. Obviously, Microsoft is a lot of people, so it's a global community of storytellers. And we have storytellers. We have over 4,000 storytellers worldwide at Microsoft in every business function you can imagine. So it's not just branding or marketing or sales or comms. You have engineers who are telling the product story kind of thing. And so we get together, we have a summit, we learn from each other. It's this really community of learning. Back to that learn it all. We don't know it, we are going to learn it. And so we're navigating it. Oh, now there's AI. How do we embed AI into our stories? So all of that continues to evolve, and we continue to evolve with it and learn with it. So somebody needs to take charge. And I would tell you, if you're a communicator listening, if you're a marketer listening, I believe that today we not only have the responsibility, but the privilege to go pilot that kind of thing and say, hey, we need to get our story together. We need to get people together. We need to have the cross-functional organization, sub-organizations and teams together. Let's create this hub. Let's put our thoughts together. Let's meet once a week. I still do storytelling hours where, for my sales team. So we have office hours and we talk and we say, hey, what's the story? What stories are our customers saying out in the field? And so it's a continuous approach of content strategy to drive culture change, to drive business, to drive customer loyalty. So many different things come out of it. So, but somebody's going to do it. And you can't expect anybody to do it if you're not doing it. So you can't complain about it if it's not happening. You can definitely pilot it. I tell people all the time when I'm like, well, how do I get started? You get started. Do a 3-month pilot and say, hey, I'm going to go do this and see how it works. And nobody's going to say no. I promise you that. And they'll be like, okay, sure, try it. And then it's going to work. And then when it works, then you can be like, okay, now I need money. So let's get funding and whatever needs to happen next.
I love all of that, and I'm fascinated by the concept of a global council. And I think a couple of important things to pull out of all of that. One, that this is something that is a big, long-term thing with a lot of touch points, like you were talking about. It isn't something that you can go a lot of times we read a quick article, hear someone speak at a conference on story and think, oh, well, we'll do more of that. But the investment and really, like you said, leading it, as you can see from your work at Microsoft. But also, I love that you cited with kind of your with your work, and you kind of said from your own perspective, but I would wager to say this is really speaks to people in general. We talk about people leaving jobs more often, and you mentioned if I didn't believe it, I wouldn't be here. And I think
Yes.
if you believe in that story, and I think there's something much bigger at work that we as employers, as leaders, need to think about of the importance of our story and making sure that it resonates with our people as well.
100%, and I think that became even more important to us through something as dire and as horrible as was the global pandemic, and
Yeah.
as a human race, how we globally had to navigate something just that so unexpected, and just didn't have the tools, we didn't have, there was no, I mean, we just didn't know where we were going next with it, and we were all forced to pause, and we were all forced to ask ourselves the purpose of life. Why am I here? I mean, there's people dying around us. If we weren't the ones that died, so it was just this whole, my goodness, can we pause the world, and where are we headed next? And we, in the last so many years, working in tech, it's beautiful, it's a privilege. It's also can be overwhelming because you're at the forefront of change always, and you're seeing the change happening, and you're going, will it ever stop? Will it ever? The answer is probably no. And so, where are we going? How are we heading? Are we prepared? Are we not? How are we ready to evolve so fastly? And so, all these different questions that come to mind when it comes to the story. The story, I say I have to make it mine. You have to make it yours. If you don't, then you're not. There's no authenticity to what you're doing, and possibly no purpose. And so, it begs you and all of us to really think about that, to think, why am I giving my hours, my energy, my presence, my talent to something I don't believe in wholly, or it's not something I align with, or the company evolved, I don't agree where it's headed. That happens all the time. And so that also, it's part, I think, of the transaction, that emotional transaction that comes behind the story. When I tell a story on behalf of Microsoft, when I'm telling people, CIOs and governors, about our products and saying, hey, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. When I'm talking to a salesperson and they're giving me their win wires and saying, this, we want this account and let's go do this, I have to really feel that. And I do. That's why I'm there. And I have to really feel the story, because I'm the author of that. I really believe, Nick, that transaction is a human transaction. It's a human to human transaction. Stories are. It's not a clickbait, and it's not an ad, and those all have a space. And we continue to drive campaigns on that, absolutely. But if you want to really be a master storyteller, empathy is number one. And then that connection, procuring that connection at the energetic level with your audience is number two, whoever they are. So if you're not feeling it, guess what? You can write the most beautiful words. Nobody's going to feel it. And I've seen that, and I've been that. So I can tell you, I've experienced that as well. So it is more, and it's beyond words. We know that words have power, but the author has the power to write them. So there's that piece of, what are we saying? How are we saying it? Where are we connecting? Where is the empathy? And the empathy goes both ways, because it provokes audiences to be empathetic with you, right? I mean, just backstage, you and I were talking about, I said, how are you? And you're like, oh, I broke my ankle. And I'm like, oh no. And so then when you told me the story, I became empathetic to you, and I got curious, and I asked more questions, and I was like, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. That's a great example of storytelling, right? You told me a small story, and then I was like, whoa, what happened? And now, are you wearing this? And what's happening? How long is the recovery? And so I was very much embedded, and I was very much connected to you and your story, because you provoked that empathy from me, right? And so that's a great example of how it works. Companies and brands are made of humans. There's humans behind the brand, and that humanity factor is what makes a brand great or not. And so we got to procure that from a storytelling perspective.
Oh, I agree with so much of that, and I could, as evidenced here, talk forever. However, it has come time for me to ask you, Mary, for a brand that has made you smile recently.
Yes, and I know it's gonna sound so redundant because I love this brand already, but I will say, storytelling, that I have been a little bit disappointed by the brand in the last couple of years, and I'm a fan, and I've been a fan, and I was like, I don't know. So Disney, and I am a Disney fan, and I'm hardcore. I mean, I live in Florida. I used to have, Disney pass. I didn't renew them last year, but I used to have Disney passes, visit the parks all the time. And then I was just like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't like the direction where it's going. There was new management. There was, the experience was not the same when you visited. So I was a little bit disappointed. And my aunt actually came I'm from Venezuela. I was born and raised there. And we didn't know, it was a beautiful surprise that she was able to get her visa to come and visit. I haven't seen her since I left the country. And it's very hard to have a visa because, people are obviously immigrating from there. So they don't give visas out. So people don't leave the country. We have a very dire political situation going on over there for the last, 15 years. Anyway, I hadn't seen my aunt in a long time. She came. It was a surprise, unplanned. She got her visa, so she came. And it was right around holidays. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. She's going to be here for like 10 days. I'm like, I will take you to Disney World. And that's because obviously, well, it's everyone's dream. I mean, if I can do anything for anyone, it's like, I will take you to Disney World, and I have to say, from my perspective, I'm like, yeah, whatever. It'll be fine. I'm not excited, but she'll be excited. Like, so I'm like, I'll take you. I'll take you. So we take on, it was a 1 day. So we did, it was 2 days, 1 day trip, and go up, and it's in the middle of the holidays. So of course, all the hotels are booked, and it's like really busy, all the things. And I was like, I'll just take you. You're here for 10 days. We got to go to Disney. So we take a road trip, go there. And I found a room in one of the hotels that I typically would have taken. My family typically go there. It's the Yacht and Beach Club. So we call that home, and that's, it's a nice tier hotel, whatever. So get there, and she's crying. By the time we're checking in, my aunt starts to cry, and I'm like, wow, she's very emotional to be here, right? And again, I am a veteran. I go like every other week, but this is her first experience. So she's crying, and she kind of moves away. I'm checking her in. And the woman at the check-in counter, she looks at my aunt, she's now kind of not visible, but she's noticed that she cried, and she goes, "Oh, is she okay?" And I said, "Oh, she's fine. It's just her first time here, and she's very emotional." Oh. And she goes, "Oh, it's her first time. Tell me more." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I'm like, you know what? She doesn't speak English, but I'll translate. I'll bring her here, and she can tell you more. So I bring her over, and now she's telling her personal story, which obviously I didn't know. And I'm translating. By the time we are done with this little story, we're all crying, right? And the lady is like, listen, give me 1 second. She walks away, comes back. She actually she gives us a presidential suite in club level. And the entire experience is just beyond magical. They gave us extra magic hours to have the park by ourselves. I mean, it was just exactly what we all hope Disney always is and does. They did that for us for 1 day. And my aunt was just, it was just it was like she was my daughter. I was just like, she was and I was like, and she's, for me to do that, for me to have that capacity, for me to be able to bring that. And then for Disney to step in and magic it, 10 times more, build that magic on top of that. It was just, I was like, oh, I forgot that they do this. Here's what they do. They see the story. They look at the story, they ask for the story, and then they add to the story. And I was like, wow, they do exactly what they're supposed to do. They brought the magic. They made the story even more magical. It was already magical for her. She was just happy to be there. She could have stayed at the Days Inn, and she would have been really happy. It didn't matter, but it was just, we didn't. We ended up, and I know the cost because I have myself paid for those kind of, but I was like, wow, like they do this still. They still do this. So I say that it's such a great example of a brand that makes you become the story versus they just tell the story. How many times do we just tell a story, and that's good enough? Okay, well, we created our brand central and now we're going to go tell the story. Great. What's the next level? How do you master? What's the mastery? We could be storytellers or story lords. If you want to be a story lord, you now then, beyond telling the story, you invite people to become part of your story. And that is magic.
Wow. Well said. And a good quote on the end of Story Masters and Story Lords. And yeah, I love that it all comes back there with Disney. And boy, are they able to walk the talk when it comes to
Well,
that magic thing.
I tell you, amazing.
Miri, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so Miri Rod, MIRIROD.com. And so that's my website. From there, you can connect in other touch points. Also, that is my handle on social media. So at Miri Rod, you'll find me on Instagram, on Twitter. X, I guess is what they call it now. I don't know, it's so weird. And then, of course, on LinkedIn. And I do love to connect with people. I do answer and reply as much as possible. It may not be immediate, but if you send me a message, even through my website, I will, I'm very, one of these things, the reason I come on these things, Nick, is not just to deliver messaging and say, hey, here, okay, bye. It really is to connect with people that are listening, your audience who I'm borrowing today. So thank you. If you're listening and you have additional questions, or if you want to get started and don't know how, and this was just too high level, whatever. If you want to connect, I really do endeavor that, because I live and I believe in the power of networking and in power of human connection. Yours and I appreciate. And so I appreciate every connection I can get. And I think that's enriches my human experience in my professional life so much. So please do connect. And if you do, I promise I'll get back to you at some point. I will, and it won't be too long.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can find at onbrandpodcast.com. Miri Rodriguez, thanks for being on brand with us.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for having me. I love your work and I love what you're doing.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.